The invitation arrived in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon. At first, Rose assumed it was another credit card offer and nearly tossed it into the trash. However, something made her pause. The envelope was not typical, it was jet black with no stamp or return address. All it had was a gold-embossed label addressed simply to Mr. and Mrs. Chris. Her curiosity piqued, Rose carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a thick card, heavy in her hands, also decorated with gold embossing. There was no name of a sender, no obvious clues. She flipped it over a few times, trying to figure out where it had come from. Finally, she read the message written in flowing cursive. An anonymous friend has recommended you for a very exclusive gathering. The details cannot be discussed in advance. Rest assured, there is nothing illegal or suspicious about this invitation. It is not a marketing ploy nor is it a trick. Your expectations for the evening will be far exceeded. The event is scheduled for May 1st at precisely 8 p.m. Semi-formal attire is required. Due to the nature of this invitation, your prompt response is necessary. Call the number below for further instructions. Sincerely, your host. Rose raised her eyebrows. How odd, she thought. She flipped the card over again, hoping for more information, but found nothing. After a moment of contemplation, she sighed and placed the card on the table, deciding to bring it up with William when he got home later. William and Rose Chris led what most would consider an ordinary suburban life. They were both in their 30s, a good-looking couple with 2 young daughters. Rose was a stay-at-home mom managing the house and kids, while William's career as an investment advisor was beginning to pick up steam. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable in their spacious home in a quiet, friendly neighborhood. Like many couples with young children, their social life had taken a back seat. Nights out were rare, and even dates had become something of a luxury. Life had settled into a steady, predictable routine. Neither of them complained, but if they were truly honest with themselves, they might admit that a little excitement, a little spark, wouldn't be unwelcome, especially behind closed doors. Their marriage was strong. They had a steady rhythm to their intimacy, usually reserving time for each other on weekends. They cared for each other deeply, with no real problems to speak of, but there was something they couldn't quite put their finger on, something absent. Nothing alarming, but a quiet, persistent sense that maybe, just maybe, life had gotten a little too predictable. When William came home that evening, Rose handed him the invitation. "What do you make of this?" she asked, watching him scan the card. William furrowed his brow. Could be some kind of fancy marketing ploy. Maybe real estate, or even one of those multi-level marketing schemes. But there's no stamp or return address, and it wasn't mailed. It just showed up, Rose said. Do you think someone delivered it by hand? William mused. Possibly, Rose replied. It's definitely strange. Should I call the number and find out what this is all about? I'm curious to know who sent it. The invitation stuck with Rose throughout the day. The more she thought about it, the more the idea intrigued her. A secretive, elegant party, something about it excited her. They hadn't been to anything remotely fancy in years, and she missed dressing up, feeling special. Maybe this mysterious invite was just what they needed to shake things up. Let's at least figure out what it is, she said after some thought. William picked up the phone and dialed the number. After a few rings, a deep, smooth voice answered. Yes, the voice said. This is William Chris. I received an invitation to some event, William began. Ah, Mr. Chris, we've been expecting your call, the voice interrupted, calm and direct. Thank you for responding so quickly. We trust that neither you nor your wife will have any scheduling conflicts on the evening in question. May I confirm your attendance? Hold on, William said, his tone growing sharp. What kind of event is this? Who are you, and how did you get our names? I need to be clear, we're not interested in any sales pitches or marketing gimmicks. I assure you, Mr. Chris, this has nothing to do with selling or marketing, the voice replied unruffled. No commitments will be asked of you. Your presence is the only thing we require. This is an exclusive event, and you and your wife have been specially selected to attend. Consider it an honor. I can promise you it will be an unforgettable evening. And who recommended us? William asked. I'm afraid that information must remain confidential, the voice said smoothly. We protect the privacy of our guests. I can only tell you that the person who suggested you attend is someone you trust implicitly. I don't like secrets, William said flatly. This whole thing seems strange. Understandable, the voice replied without missing a beat. But I assure you, Mr. Chris, there's nothing to fear. This will be one of the most unique and pleasurable nights of your life. Now, may I confirm your attendance? William covered the receiver and glanced at Rose, who had been hanging on his every word. Just then, another couple entered the room. They introduced themselves as J and V, a strikingly attractive black couple with an almost exotic allure, just like the rest of the guests. William immediately noticed how tall and broad-shouldered Jay was. He must have been about 6 feet 5 inches with the kind of muscular build that hinted at a former life as a professional athlete. His wife, V, was equally captivating. She wore a vibrant, multicolored dress that hugged her voluptuous curves, catching the eye of nearly every man in the room as she moved with fluid grace. As Terry and Joan exchanged pleasantries with J and V, they discovered that this was their first time attending an event like this as well. They were as puzzled by the secrecy and mystery surrounding the evening as Terry and Joan were. He says everything's above board and promises a good time, but he's pretty vague about who he is or why we got picked, William said, his voice laced with doubt. I'm not sure what to think. What about you? It's definitely a bit creepy, Rose admitted. But there's something intriguing about it too. Worst case, if it's a bust, we can always leave, right? William nodded, thinking it over. What's the harm? I guess. He paused for a moment longer, then brought the phone back to his ear. All right, we'll attend, he said cautiously. But I hope this isn't some kind of prank. Where and when? The 1st of May at 8 p.m. sharp, the voice responded smoothly. Congratulations on accepting. There will be drinks, dinner, and live entertainment. Dress is semi-formal. Do you need the address? Yeah, go ahead, William said, reaching for a pen. I'm ready. 15901 PCK Way. Are you familiar with the area? William's eyes widened slightly. He knew exactly where that was, one of the most exclusive, upscale parts of town. He had clients who lived around there. Yes, I know it, he said. Perfect. Upon arrival, you'll be asked for a password to ensure privacy and discretion. The password is royal. Please keep this to yourself. Got it, William replied, though his skepticism lingered. We're certain you'll have an unforgettable evening, Mr. Chris. We look forward to seeing you and your wife. Good evening. With that, the line went dead, leaving William and Rose staring at each other. For the next several days, the mystery of the invitation became a frequent topic of conversation between them. William remained convinced it was some kind of elaborate prank, despite sharing his unease. Rose couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement. The thought of a glamorous, high-end party was appealing, and she'd already started daydreaming about what to wear. As the days went by, everyday life nearly distracted them from the event. Rose managed to secure a nanny for the night and sneak away to shop for a form-fitting cocktail dress and accessories. When the day finally came, she treated herself to a full makeover at a high-end salon, leaving her feeling refreshed and beautiful. Meanwhile, William had done some quiet digging, trying to find out more about the party, the host, or anyone who might have recommended them. He came up empty. In the end, he resigned himself to the idea that the only way to get answers was to actually attend that evening. Rose stood in front of the mirror, preparing for the night. She had treated herself to new lingerie from Victoria's Secret, a black satin set that hugged her body perfectly. As she examined her reflection, she felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. At 5 feet 4 inches with dark hair styled in soft, elegant waves, she looked stunning. The antique clip holding her hair in place added a classic touch, and her green eyes sparkled with anticipation. At 34, Rose had maintained her figure through a healthy lifestyle. Her high, firm breasts and toned body radiated confidence. Her skin glowed with a natural tan, and her sleek cocktail dress showed off her long legs. William walked in after his shower, a towel around his waist, and couldn't help but grin when he saw her. "Wow," he said, taking in her transformation. "You look incredible." Rose smiled over her shoulder, a hint of playfulness in her eyes. "Do you like it?" "Like it?" he chuckled, admiring how the dress clung to her body. "You look amazing." "Is that new?" "Oh, just something I dug out of the back of the closet," she teased with a wink. "Yeah, sure. Even in something from a thrift store, you'd look stunning," Rose laughed, slipping into her sequin jacket to complete the look. Always the charmer. Once the nanny was briefed on her duties, William and Rose headed out. As they drove through the exclusive neighborhood, they marveled at the grandeur of the homes around them. Each one was larger and more opulent than the last, with perfectly manicured lawns and towering gates. When they reached 1591, the sun had just begun to set, casting a soft golden light over the property. The gates opened, and they slowly drove up the long, winding driveway lined with trees and flowers. The house, or rather, the estate, loomed before them, its grand architecture bathed in the warm glow of exterior lighting. A large chandelier sparkled through the towering windows, and a fountain in front of the house added a touch of elegance to the already impressive sight. Several expensive cars were already parked around the fountain, and a valet in a sharp uniform stepped forward as William pulled up. "Well, I've definitely seen worse," William joked, though even he was clearly impressed by the display. After handing off the car keys to the valet, William and Rose walked down a grand corridor toward the massive front doors of the mansion. Before they had a chance to knock, the doors swung open, revealing a tall, handsome man dressed sharply in a butler's uniform. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Chris," he said without missing a beat. "May I ask for the password?" Both Rose and William were taken aback, surprised that this stranger already seemed to know exactly who they were. William looked into the butler's striking blue eyes as if trying to gauge whether this was all part of the mystery. "Royal," William said cautiously. "Perfect. Right this way, please," the butler gestured for them to follow, leading them down a dimly lit hallway. The soft glow of sconces flickered against the rich mahogany walls, and the house itself oozed elegance. Rose and William couldn't help but admire the ornate furniture, the fine art, and the subtle opulence of the mansion's interior. They were soon led into an impressive library. Every wall from floor to ceiling was lined with towering oak shelves crammed with books. The room exuded warmth and comfort, with plush leather chairs and couches positioned strategically for reading or quiet conversation. In the center, a small gathering of elegantly dressed guests sipped cocktails and nibbled on appetizers. The atmosphere was intimate but charged with anticipation. William scanned the room, his eyes darting from face to face, trying to spot anyone he might recognize. The guests appeared to be around their age, 30-somethings, dressed to the nines, radiating wealth and success. There were a few couples here and there, chatting softly in pairs. Then, out of the corner of his eye, William spotted someone familiar. It was Mickey, a friend of his from the racquetball courts. Mickey noticed them too and gave an enthusiastic wave, grinning as he crossed the room. Before they could approach, the butler reappeared, holding out 2 small jewelry boxes. "A gift from the host," the butler said smoothly. "Please wear these throughout the evening. They serve as your identification, also as part of the house's privacy protocol. Guests are to address each other only by their initials. We ask that you respect this rule." William and Rose exchanged curious glances as they opened the boxes. Inside each was a medallion engraved with their initials, hanging on a satin ribbon, purple for William, pink for Rose. They slipped the medallions around their necks, the weight of the gold cool against their skin. Mickey, or M as he would now be known, greeted them with open arms and a broad smile. "So glad you both made it," he said, pulling them into a warm hug. "I've been waiting to see you here. You're in for quite the night." "Mickey, this place is unbelievable," William said, looking around. "What's the deal with all this? Who owns this house?" Mickey chuckled, but his eyes twinkled with mischief. "I can't tell you, my friend. But I promise you, it's going to be an amazing experience. You have no idea how hard it was to get you invited." William raised an eyebrow, still filled with questions. "Who are all these people? Why the secrecy, the initials, everything?" Mickey grinned again. "All will be revealed soon. Just enjoy yourselves for now. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. This is no ordinary party." Rose, listening to the exchange, couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. The mansion, the mystery, it all felt like stepping into a dream. "It's all so extravagant," she said, a bit in awe. "We really didn't know what to expect." Mickey's wife, Mandy, sidled up to them, her glittering gold dress catching the light. "You haven't even seen the best of it yet," she teased, giving William a playful wink before gliding away to mingle with other guests. William couldn't help but notice how stunning she looked, tall with long blonde hair that flowed past her shoulders. Her tight dress hugged her curves perfectly, and her eyes had a way of flirting with him whenever their paths crossed. He watched her walk off, admiring her figure until Rose caught him in the act and playfully nudged him. Soon after, William and Rose found themselves chatting with two other couples. One man, S, was broad-shouldered and strong, like he'd stepped right off a football field. He took William's hand with a firm grip, then surprised Rose by taking her hand and kissing it softly. His deep brown eyes lingered on hers as he smiled. "Welcome," he said warmly, his voice smooth and inviting. Rose blushed slightly but smiled back. "Thank you. This is our first time at something like this. The whole thing feels so mysterious." S chuckled. "You're not wrong. It's all part of the excitement, though, don't you think? My wife, T, and I have been to a few of these events, but every time it feels like we're stepping into another world." T was a stunning redhead with sharp, elegant features. She and William chatted casually for a few minutes while S turned his attention back to Rose. His smile grew wider. "I hope you're ready for a memorable evening," he said softly, his sandy hair speckled with gray at the temples, and his tan skin gave him a rugged charm that Rose found surprisingly appealing. "Definitely," Rose replied, meeting his gaze. "We're both curious to see what's in store. It's a little mysterious, but in a good way. Just wait," S winked. "It's about to get even better." "Me too," S murmured, his voice low, his eyes lingering on Rose in a way that made her feel weak in the knees. There was something about the way he looked at her, with a mix of charm and intensity, that made her pulse quicken. Just then, another couple entered the room. They introduced themselves as J and V, a strikingly attractive black couple with an almost exotic allure, just like the rest of the guests. William immediately noticed how tall and broad-shouldered J was. He must have been about 6 feet 5 inches with the kind of muscular build that hinted at a former life as a professional athlete. His wife, V, was equally captivating. She wore a vibrant, multicolored dress that hugged her voluptuous curves, catching the eye of nearly every man in the room as she moved with fluid grace. As William and Rose exchanged pleasantries with J and V, they discovered that this was their first time attending an event like this as well. They were as puzzled by the secrecy and mystery surrounding the evening as William and Rose were. Before they could dive deep into conversation, a man neither William nor Rose had noticed before strode into the library. He was tall, broad, and completely bald, dressed in a uniform similar to the butler's. The man stepped into the center of the group and rang a small bell, commanding everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome," he began, his voice authoritative yet warm. "My name is Mr. Doran, and I speak on behalf of your host, who unfortunately cannot join us this evening. However, I assure you that we will make this night memorable in his absence. Some of you are here for the first time, so let me extend my congratulations and gratitude for your presence tonight." Doran's eyes swept the room before he continued. "In a few moments, dinner will be served in the adjoining dining room. Afterward, we have arranged special entertainment in the ballroom. But before we proceed, I must remind you of one simple rule: please use your initial medallions when addressing one another. This helps maintain the privacy and confidentiality that are central to tonight's experience. Enjoy the evening." With that, the guests were led into a vast dining room, lavishly decorated and filled with the rich scent of a gourmet meal already laid out on the grand table. The staff, attentive and professional, served them with precision. The seating arrangement was strategic. Couples were seated apart, allowing everyone the chance to mix and engage more freely. Rose and William were placed at opposite ends of the table, exchanging glances every so often but each enjoying their own conversations. Rose, especially, found herself delighted by her dinner companion, S, whose easy charm and striking good looks made her feel giddy and young again. As dessert was served, a delicate, extravagant creation, Mr. Doran returned once again, ringing the bell to gather their attention. "I trust you all enjoyed dinner," he asked with a knowing smile. The guests nodded in agreement, satisfied and impressed by the feast. "Now, as we prepare for the evening's entertainment, there are a few additional instructions I need to provide, particularly for those of you who are new. In the ballroom, couples will be seated together at first. When the performance begins, ladies, at the sound of the bell, you will move to the next seat on your left, continuing this rotation throughout the evening. Gentlemen, you will remain seated. This will allow everyone to become better acquainted with one another. I assure you, the experience will be stimulating." There was a brief pause as the guests exchanged uncertain glances. The tension in the room had thickened slightly. Rose, William, J, and V all seemed a bit more on edge after hearing these unusual instructions. The secrecy surrounding the event, the shifting partners, it was all a little unnerving. Yet, the rest of the group seemed unbothered, embracing the strange rules with ease. Doran's voice softened. "If at any point you feel uncomfortable, you are free to leave. However, we ask that you respect the boundaries and feelings of your fellow guests. Now, let the evening begin." As the guests filed into the ballroom, Rose and William found themselves seated together, but the atmosphere had shifted. The room was dimly lit, casting an intimate glow over the opulent surroundings. The chairs were arranged in a large circle, and a hushed excitement filled the air. Suddenly, the doors opened, and a slender woman with flowing blonde hair stepped into the room. She was dressed as a bride, white gown, veil, the whole image of innocence. Yet, her every move hinted at something far more seductive. She approached the center of the room as soft music began to play, her delicate hands reaching up to slowly remove her veil. The guests watched with rapt attention as she glided across the floor, her body swaying to the rhythm. Each movement was deliberate and sensual. As the music swelled, she began to peel off her gloves, letting them fall to the floor. Her smile was teasing, her gaze playful as she unbuttoned the top of her wedding gown, letting it slide down her waist to reveal a set of delicate, lacy white lingerie. The young man she approached, who was seated across from William, could barely contain his grin. His eyes were wide with anticipation as the bride knelt in front of him. Rose couldn't look away. She sat hypnotized by the scene unfolding before her. The bride's every move seemed to pulse with erotic energy, and the atmosphere in the room grew thicker with each second. William too watched closely, but his mind flickered with unease. The boundaries of this evening were shifting, and neither he nor Rose were sure where it would all lead. Although she and William had watched a few risque movies late at night, nothing compared to the live spectacle unfolding before them. Yet, despite the intensity of what she was seeing, Rose felt conflicted. Her upbringing had drilled a sense of morality into her, and maybe in another situation, she would have felt guilty for even being in a room like this. But guilt wasn't what she felt now. Instead, a deeper, primal excitement coursed through her veins. She squeezed William's hand, letting the arousal sweep over her. The realization sinking in, she was undeniably turned on. William too was stunned by the scene in front of him. Whatever misgivings he'd had about this party, he certainly hadn't anticipated this. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it all, but soon he found himself lost in the moment, pulling Rose closer to him as the spectacle unfolded. They had started touching each other, forgetting about the other guests entirely, until the sudden ringing of a bell jolted Rose back to the present. Her heart raced. According to the instructions, it was time to move to the next seat on the left, but she felt paralyzed by the idea of leaving William's side. How could she, in this state, sit next to someone she barely knew? "Oh, William," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are we supposed to do?" William, struggling with his own thoughts, could feel the pull of what was happening, almost as if the party had been designed to push them to the very edge of temptation. Was this the goal? To lure couples into a state of heightened desire, to turn the night into something more than a mere social gathering? The thought unnerved him, yet it also excited him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. He glanced at Rose and then back at the red-haired woman, T, now standing in front of him. "I think I should be here," T said softly, her cheeks flushed as her eyes locked with his. For a moment, William's mind raced with the idea of what might happen next. The thought of his wife being with someone else had never crossed his mind before, and he hated it. But everything tonight seemed to be happening so fast, and the room hummed with the tension of new possibilities. "It's okay, honey," William finally said, trying to sound composed despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. Rose hesitated, confused by his words. Her eyes widened, and she gave him a brief, panicked look before she slowly stood and moved toward the next seat, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. As she approached Mickey, she couldn't help but notice his welcoming smile, enjoying the show. "Enjoying the show, Mickey?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes held a knowing glint. Rose barely heard him. Her focus was still on the stage where the bride now lay on the bed, her chest rising and falling with each movement. The groom, grinning, began undressing himself with deliberate slowness. "It's really something," Rose muttered, her voice distant. Mickey leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "It's intriguing, isn't it?" Rose, still transfixed by the scene unfolding in front of her, nodded in agreement. Her heart raced, pounding in her chest so loudly she thought Mickey could probably hear it. She watched, breathless, as the young groom gently kissed the bride's ankle and slowly made his way up her leg. Each kiss was more deliberate than the last. Her skin tingled as she sensed Mickey's presence beside her, aware of his gaze sliding over her bare thighs. Though she was too lost in the moment to react, Mickey, seeing his chance, inched closer. This was the moment he'd been waiting for since he first invited William and Rose to the party. Mickey had always admired Rose, her innocence, her beauty, and the way she carried herself. Now, with William distracted by tea across the room, Mickey saw his opportunity to make his move. As the tension in the room heightened, Mickey's hand gently brushed Rose's knee, testing her reaction. To his surprise, there was no resistance. Rose was overwhelmed with desire, her mind swirling in a haze of lust and confusion. The soft music, the intimate setting, the raw physicality of the performance on stage, it all mixed together, blurring the lines between what she thought she wanted and what she was allowing to happen. Mickey's hand slid higher, and still, Rose remained frozen, her breath hitching slightly as her dress inched further up her leg. Rose glanced down momentarily, snapping out of her trance, and noticed Mickey's hand stroking her bare skin. She raised her head, her eyes meeting Mickey's mischievous smile. "Let me help you relax," he whispered, his voice smooth as velvet. He gently took her hands, removing them from her lap, and leaned in even closer, his gaze locking onto hers. Rose's mind was spinning. The boundaries of the night were dissolving as she felt herself falling deeper into the spell of the evening. Meanwhile, William, lost in a throe of his own experience with tea, suddenly remembered Rose. He glanced across the room and saw her with Mickey, their bodies close, her face flushed. A surge of irritation flared within him, but he quickly pushed it down. After all, hadn't he been the one to let her sit beside another man? The rules of the evening were vague, the expectations unclear, but as he watched Mickey's hand on Rose's thigh, a pit formed in his stomach. The bell rang again, signaling another shift, breaking the spell for a moment. In a daze, Rose stood, and Mickey, sensing the moment wasn't quite right, smiled and whispered, "We'll finish this later." He straightened her dress and led her to the next seat just as she caught sight of a dark silhouette waiting for her in the dim light, a new partner, another step deeper into the unknown. Jay watched her approach with a predatory intensity, his sharp eyes tracking her every step. Though he sat relaxed in his chair, his presence was anything but passive. His jacket hung open, revealing smooth skin and rippling muscles beneath his unbuttoned shirt, an almost casual display of power. Sensing Rose's hesitation, he extended his hand and spoke in a low, calming voice. "Come sit with me. Don't be afraid. Let me take care of you." Rose hesitated only for a moment before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle, and as she settled beside him, her nerves tingled with both fear and excitement. Across the room, William found himself in his own confusing swirl of emotions. Jay's wife, V, had taken the seat next to him. She smiled nervously, her lips soft and tentative, a mirror of his own unease. Despite the awkwardness, something about the shared vulnerability between them felt oddly comforting. "Are you okay?" William asked softly, his concern genuine. V met his gaze with a faint smile, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I think so. But I never imagined this. It's overwhelming." "We feel the same," William replied, relieved to find someone who understood the strangeness of it all. "It's surreal, but at the same time, I've never felt so alive." He regretted the words as soon as they slipped out, worried he might have said too much. But V smiled warmly, and he found himself admiring her exotic beauty, the smoothness of her skin, the curve of her lips, the confidence she exuded even in this bizarre situation. "Me too," she whispered, her eyes flashing with something more than just nervousness. For a moment, they shared a quiet connection, acknowledging the heat building between them, a fire kindled by the events on stage and now stoked by their own desires. Meanwhile, Jay's attention remained fixed on Rose. He could sense her unease, but more than that, he could feel her growing curiosity. She was trying to keep her eyes on the performance, but her focus kept drifting back to him. Leaning in, he whispered, his voice deep and smooth. "You've never been close to someone like me before, have you?" Rose blinked, her breath catching. "Never," she murmured, her voice small, almost childlike, as if in awe of the sheer size of him. She turned to look at him fully now, her eyes wide as if standing in the shadow of a giant. Jay smiled, his voice soft but commanding. "It's all right. You'll be surprised how gentle I can be." His words held a promise that sent a thrill through her. Her hand trembled slightly as he reached for it, pulling her closer. His grip was steady and reassuring. Just as the tension between them built to a breaking point, the bell rang again, interrupting the moment. Rose stood, her legs unsteady, and Jay helped her up, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. She pulled her dress back into place, her heart pounding as she moved toward the next seat. Her mind was a blur, half drunk on the cocktail of excitement, fear, and desire coursing through her. As she walked, the heat between her and Jay lingered, even though she was already thinking about what came next. Waiting for her was S. He stood tall and confident, his broad chest and strong arms on full display. His warm smile was inviting her in. Rose's breath hitched as she took him in. His physique was stunning, his body carved with the precision of a Greek sculpture. As he opened his arms to her, she didn't hesitate. She let her dress slip from her body and stepped into his embrace. Their lips met in a passionate kiss that ignited every nerve in her body. "Please," she whispered breathlessly, "don't torture me." Smiled against her lips, his touch firm but tender. He gave her exactly what she craved, no hesitation, no games. Their bodies moved together in perfect sync, a whirlwind of pleasure that was more intense than anything she had imagined. On the other side of the room, William watched, torn between his own desires and the sight of his wife in the arms of another man. His heart pounded with a mix of arousal and confusion. His mind spun as the night spiraled deeper into something none of them had expected. Everywhere he looked, couples were intertwined, exploring each other with reckless abandon. The room had transformed into a haze of raw passion, the air thick with the sounds of pleasure. Mr. Doran, fully immersed in the wild energy of the night, had stripped down and joined the performance. His body moved among the guests as they lost themselves to the experience. William's eyes darted from person to person, taking in the scene around him with a mix of awe and unease. It was an orgiastic frenzy, an erotic storm that swept through the room, pulling everyone in. And yet, amidst the chaos, William's gaze kept returning to Rose. She was lost in her own world, wrapped in the arms of her body moving with a freedom he hadn't seen in years. He knew he should feel anger, jealousy, something. But all he felt was the strange sense that he was watching something inevitable unfold. The night had taken them somewhere they had never expected, and now there was no going back. Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. Trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.